The 80-20 rule is ultra important. This rule was almost universal. You need to be looking at things that are relatable. So you're finding the one thing that impacts the many things.
Welcome to Business Model Hackers, the podcast where we decode the strategies and tools for successful business management. Now, you should know Sam Schreim left a lucrative career to pursue entrepreneurship, and part of that process is the show you're listening to today. We're going to be diving into the 80-20 rule and how that's reshaping business as we operate in this fast-moving world. He's advised executives from Fortune 500 companies to startups and entrepreneurs. He's also worked with large and medium organizations, advising governments and nonprofits on matter of strategy and general management. All right, let's hack into today's topic. Sam, we're here for another one, the 80-20 rule.
Hey, oh, great. That's an excellent topic, I think. One of the rules that I use the most on a daily basis for everything, not just business. Anything I do is always 80-20. And I guess we'll get into that and how, in this episode. I mean, whether you're a business owner or you're an executive or a manager, whatever you do in your life, looking at 80-20 as a rule of thumb is, I think, life-changing for most of us, really, if you understand the concept and the idea behind it.
Now, for those who are unfamiliar with the idea of 80-20 rule, what is it and why is it useful for business?
Yeah, I mean, the 80-20 rule is ultra important, specifically in the context of today. And I would say, to sum it up, right, 2 words, it's about our world, which is in our day today, we're bombarded with so many things across the board, from information overload to problem overload, to things you got to do and you got to handle and cram in your day, whether at work or not at work. So given that you have all these things, right, you need to prioritize. So the 80-20 rule has a history to it, an interesting history, and was invented by Vilfredo, who's an engineer, architect, an Italian agriculturer. Vilfredo, he was harvesting peas in his garden, and he found that some of his pea pods accounted for a large portion of the peas that he was able to harvest. When he did the math, he found out that around 20%, or 1 in 5, accounted for 80% of the total harvest. And then, given that he's a scientist, he went on and did a lot of research and applied that rule to things like land. And he found out that land ownership, for example, is owned by 20% of people, that 20% of the wealthy accounted for 80% of the wealth in Italy. And a lot of this rule was almost universal. Of course, it's not exactly 80-20, but the idea is a very small percentage of causes accounts for 80% of outcome. That's the general rule of 80-20. That's the fundamental principle of how 80-20 works.
What are some areas that people can apply that to actually start to identify that vital ratio? Is there areas in particular that they should be looking at to help speed that process up as opposed to looking at the business as a whole? Or is it needed to look at the whole business to be able to actually identify those very vital ratios?
The nice thing about this rule is that it's universal. It applies to everything that you do in life. Whatever you consider, whenever you're looking to apply the 80-20 rule, you need to be looking at things that are related. For example, you're looking to apply, let's say, the 80-20 rule into problem solving. If you're looking at a specific problem, you look to apply the 80-20 rule into that specific problem. So you find the 20% go into the root causes of what's causing that problem. So the more you zoom in there, the deeper you go into the root cause, the more you are applying that rule into identifying the one thing that you can influence the most, right? So for example, let's say you have a cough, you're sneezing. Let me take that example into the health. You have a cold, you're sneezing, you have a sore throat and all that kind of stuff. So you may trace that back to you have a cold. How did you get the cold? Let's say you want to solve the cold. There are several layers into how you want to solve the cold. You can actually go get treatment and get medication. I mean, you could find one tablet that does all that, but it may have 10 different ingredients. Something for your cold, something for your sore throat, something for your cough, something for runny eyes, runny nose. So all of these different ingredients are targeting all these different symptoms. But you can go a level deeper if you go a level before that and you say, okay, what caused the cold in the first place? Could be that, you got mixed up in an area where everybody had a cold, if you wore, for example, a mask at that point, you wouldn't have gotten a cold. So you could have worn a mask. One thing you could have done could have prevented you from getting all these symptoms. But let's say you could not wear a mask. You could go a level deeper and say, okay, what actually caused you? Maybe you could have gotten a flu shot. It's something that is covered in the flu as a vaccine. It's the one thing you could do that prevents you from getting not one cold, but 10 colds, right? So then you could go a level deeper and see, well, maybe it's a lifestyle thing. So if you were living a healthy lifestyle, your immune system would have been stronger. Solving a problem has layers to it. And the deeper you go in a layer, the more you are addressing this from a, let's say, power law or a Pareto principle. So you're finding the one thing that impacts the many things that, for example, your business is facing. So if your business is having issues in terms of profits, cash flow, and all these kind of things, you may trace it back to the one thing that your products aren't innovative enough, for example. You may find that your product is competing in a red ocean, right? Where everybody, like, it's a cutthroat competitive environment. So that's like taking it into the one problem type of thing. But before the 80-20 rule was commonly known, consultants used to sell this aspect, reveal these kind of insights from the data they used to get in companies. That's back in the 80s and 90s. So when they reveal this kind of insights, the executives would be like, oh wow, whoa, this is great information, etc. You know, the 80-20 rule wasn't a concept that's very well known. Right now, everybody knows. And the importance is that it can be applied anywhere. I gave you the example of stock market. I gave you the example of your own personal life, right? Even if you're looking at, I wrote a book about minimalism. It's called Greatness Through Subtraction. And in the first chapter, I talk about the 80-20 rule because this is something where you can actually declutter, for example, your house. You can do basically a lot of things with the 80-20 rule in terms of minimizing the effort and increasing your productivity, especially if you know the power of recursiveness and you apply the rule recursively. I hope that addresses the question.
Absolutely. No, more than addressed it. And this really opens up the discussion to ask the question of, are there any methods or approaches in terms of analysis that one can engage in to help identify in business or in team leadership, workplace culture, just in general, are there actual methodologies that can help us suss out and really identify which things we even want to be looking at?
But what's important, I think, instead of using Excel, I think the purpose of at least this episode is not to get to the technicalities of how to do 80-20. I mean, it could really get complicated if extracting data and analyzing data in terms of finding the right data and all that kind of stuff. But I think the more important power of the rule is that you can use it as a rule of thumb. I think that's the power, right? The more you are able to think in that way across the board, across everything you do, the more you can benefit, whether on a personal level or in business.
Understood. Well, then I think that does it for today's discussion. Please be sure to check out businessmodelhackers.com for up-to-date information on this podcast. Our social channels as well will be listed there, and Sam's books. Also, if you subscribe to our email list, we'll be sharing with you downloadable resources that include far more detailed information in regards to all the trends and tools that we talk about on this show and a lot more. Thanks for stopping by.